I've got 5 minutes, and in my 5 minutes I'll try to do three things. First, the title of our panel refers to the public good, so my focus will be on what I consider to be the single biggest threat to the public good in the domain of communications policy. Second, I will identify a strategic policy response that the FCC might consider to approach, and I will provide not one but four catchy catchwords to describe this strategic policy, which is often important to success in the policy world, and I'll try to identify a technological basis for that policy. What is the biggest threat to the public interest in communications? I think it's the reliance on a duopoly for the provision of broadband access. Duopoly history, we can point just recently to the early days of a wireline and wireless, non-wireline duopoly and wireless cellular telephony. And it wasn't until 1991 when the FCC introduced PCS as a potential competitor that we saw a drop in any of the prices in the top 10 markets for cellular telephony. Not the introduction of competition, but simply the possibility of competition. So I think there's a lot to think about. If you imagine that monopoly provision has problems, duopoly is close. What if AT&T had invented the internet? Well, in fact, they did. We called it ISDN, and we don't need to get into ISDN stories today. Is there a possible strategic response that the Commission might champion? I believe there is. And the response is to move towards a collapsing of the distinction that we've lived with for so many years between wireline and wireless. We keep thinking of the PSTN and wireless alternatives, but if we think about the particularly important element of the design of cellular systems, which is you can build them out as demand increases, if we think about moving fiber or coax closer and closer and making the last 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet wireless, the notion of wireless and wireline being combined into some, here's where we need some new words, and some of the words I would propose is the concept of universal access. If you think about the origins of the concept of universal service, that was originated not by the Commission, which didn't exist at the time, but by AT&T, and it was the notion that we will provide universal service in return for monopoly provision. I think the concept of universal access is best served by just the opposite, and that is by competitive provision. So my other buzzword would be ComPro for competitive provision. The concept of universal access would involve universal availability, rural and remote areas as well, that it would be affordable, and I think that's one of the principal responses to competitive provision. That it would be sufficiently broadband, and I'll return to that in 1 second, and that it would be open and unfiltered. It seems to me that the issue of network neutrality continues to complicate the movement forward in the domain of advanced communication services, and I think the best answer in the long run to avoiding the delicacies of the network neutrality debate is to have competitive provision. So if somebody isn't providing a service by filtering or choking off heavy usage of some kind, we've got alternatives that individuals can turn to, which I think would be the best way to guarantee truly neutrality in a future service. So the technological basis is broadband wireless. My other term is when we were trying to get maximum bandwidth across twisted pair copper, we used the phrase to sweat the copper. So my proposal is to sweat the ether. And I'm also, as John did, making a bold statement by putting forth such a proposal. I'm disagreeing with Susan Crawford, something I don't often recommend, but I find myself, her argument is, if you're going to if you really have broadband provision and you're going to provide it wirelessly, you have to be leaning on the cell tower. And I think she will come to appreciate the fact that there are prospects for a future of wireless provision that is a short hop from a remote electronics that will provide broadband access. So that leads me to my last buzzword, which is 802.11y. It's not 802.11z, which would be the ultimate, but 802.11y some years ago was approved at this commission and allows for up to 3 miles of WiMAX service, 20-watt technology. I think with a 3-mile radius, we're talking about a very important step forward in blurring the distinction between wireless and wireline.